I think we're going live. So, hello viewers. Hello viewers at home. Thank you very much for watching. So Facebook and Zoom, we're streaming on right now. Welcome to Definitely Theatre's Writers Panel. So we're talking about representation today. I'm going to introduce our guests, our three writers. So I'm a writer too, and I'm hosting today. My name is Charlie Swinbourne, and my surname is Charlie. I've written for lots of things, Casualty, I've written for Moving On for the BBC, so various dramas, various comedies throughout the years. So also joining us today is Mike. Mike, can you introduce yourself?
I can when I get off mute. Hello, I'm Mike. I'm a writer, playwright, firstly, and I've written various plays for theatre, King Charles III, Earthquakes in London, other things, and I've written for television. I wrote Dr. Foster and various other things as well. So that's me.
Wow, what a catalogue. I love Dr. Foster. I think it was an amazing show. I also saw King Charles III. That was amazing too. So welcome, Mike. Welcome to this panel. Thank you so much for coming.
It's great to be here.
So next, we've got Nadia. Would you like to introduce yourself? Hi, everyone. I'm Nadia Nadarajah, and I am new to writing actually for theatre, but I've written some short films in the past. My writing career is starting to develop in the theatre world currently, so fantastic. Thank you, Nadia. And next, Sahera, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Sahera Khan, and I've been probably writing for about 10 years now. So I've written some short plays and some short films, some books, and that's it really.
Busy. We're all very busy people, our three panelists. So thank you very much for coming. So our discussion is going to be about 1 hour, and then we do have a Q&A for you, the audience. So if you have any questions, please post them into our Q&A chat feature. Write your questions for our panelists there, and we can pose them later in that session. Don't worry about your English or your grammar. Stick it into the chat and we will present it to the panel. Please think of good questions, difficult questions. That's what we want to encourage. Do any of you panelists obviously have questions? Please use them. We want to hear about what you want to know, what your thoughts are. Also, firstly, what made you become writers? What influenced you? So Mike, can we start with you? Where did you start? Why did you become a writer?
Well, it wasn't through words, it was through acting and theatre, and I wanted to be a director originally because I thought that's where the power lay in theatre, and I may be right about that. I'm yet to come to a conclusion, but the problem, what I found was that I didn't know anyone in theatre at all. Everyone said use your contacts, and I didn't have any contacts, and I would write these cover letters to go for interviews to be like an assistant director, and then get in the room and realize that you needed charisma and charm and all these things that certainly didn't come naturally to me. And so eventually, stuck at home without any work, I thought I'll write instead. And then I wrote a lot of very bad things, I should say. And then eventually I wrote something which I sent off, and got me meetings with those same people but this time it wasn't about me in the room. It was about this bunch of papers in front of me. And that suddenly made me comfortable, because I realized that, and since then I've never looked back in terms of what I wanted to do, that I just love writing other people that are not me, and I'm not part of the equation, although of course secretly I am. I'm in everybody, but I pretend I'm not. And since then I've just written as much as possible, and the good things tried to give them to people, and the bad things tried to put in the bin. Yeah, that's how I got into it.
I really enjoyed your series, Life. I think it was earlier this year. It was fantastic. So I just wanted to say well done for that. Nadia, what made you start writing? How did you even come to it? It was really strange, actually, because my first language was BSL, obviously. I find that the best way to express myself growing up, going to the deaf club, we always shared stories. I was always really good at it, and everybody used to say to me, write it down, make a film. And I think what put me off was the English, because English is such a different language. And so I was never very confident to write. I could tell stories, I could develop stories. I'd done it for years and years and years. And obviously, my career today is acting. I've been an actor, but I was learning through the process, talking with directors, working, doing research and development. And then I was working on this book here. And when we started it from scratch. The process, we thought about, how can I write a book? And with her, I then built this book. I did R&D, research and development, and then English, like I said, had always really put me off. And I was like, well, how can I contribute? So I did with that, and developed my storytelling through somebody else's writing. So this one, I would have like keywords. Then they would tell me these keywords, and then they would tell me this kind of the idea and the script, and then just tell me what your idea is about the story in your first language, and then they would translate it and develop it later. So the name is Eve Lee, and her name is this. So then she's learned how, deaf people worked in terms of their communication. And then she gave me an opportunity to develop a story in my own way, visually, through BSL. And then she would put it into English. And then it gave me, there's an opportunity here. There is an opportunity for me to do writing, but keep it in my own language. It gave me that freedom to be able to contribute. I got more and more keen on writing. But then I was like looking at the opportunities, where are these people? Where are these writers that are me? Or, ethnic diversity, somebody who was deaf. There was nobody else like that. So it was time for me to start. It was time for me to build up the representation of me in the writing world. So you've done a lot of acting. So you think your acting career influenced your writing because of the nature of what you did, reading scripts and then turning it into BSL. Yeah, absolutely. Nadia's agreeing. Absolutely. It was the time of translation. Writers would write in English for hearing people, and I would be then applying that to me as a deaf person, as a deaf actor, and how does that relate? It doesn't work. And then we'd have to adapt writing, and make it meet the needs of deaf actors and deaf audiences. That it enabled us to merge the two cultures. Because we have a link, we're all human. So yeah, it's really important to have that influence. Thank you, Nadia. Sahera, where did you start? What was your interest? What influenced you?
Oh, I'm going to try and keep it brief. I started writing probably more than 10 years ago now, and my it was based on, you know, my experiences. I grew up in London. I always loved telling different stories. I used to write different stories growing up, and I used to love doing that. And I never thought of becoming a writer. Then I got married and had a baby, and just everything seemed to stop. And I wanted to become creative again. I wanted to do something. And I thought, I'm going to start writing. And I went on a short course, just like, you know, the taster courses just for a day that covered poems, short storytelling. And people were saying to me, oh, I really like that. So that was my first nervous step. And then I went on a 10-week creative writing course, which was a lot more varied in content, talking about shorter stories, poems, and we were free to write what we wanted to write about. There was no restrictions. So that built up my confidence. And then I started doing blogs, which were, they were like slow writing guides really, but I built up my confidence from them, came back into the deaf world. I saw BSL Zone, what was going on there, how people were getting into writing and how things were written. And it took my interest. So I then wrote a short, I got commissioned by BSL Zone to write something. And that was my first experience of that. And I then got involved in the lead actor and the processes after that. And I really enjoyed the writing process. So I've written 10 books, and I've written some other short stories as well. And that's built up my confidence with that. Recently, I did a short film called Faith. So that was launched last year at the film festival. So I was picked as the best storyline at the Deaf Film Festival. So yeah, I was really pleased with that.
Congratulations.
But yeah, it's been a slow build up, working with the deaf community, BSL Zone. I've had a lot of support from hearing people as well that have had really good feedback, and that's helped my confidence. And here I am now.
So for you, it's a journey, isn't it? It's not you just start writing, there it is, it's all finished, I'm done. It has been a real process for all of you, trying to
Absolutely.
improve the skill. So Mike, you said you wrote a script to people, and finally somebody was impressed. So what happened after that? How did you then how did you grow? How did you improve your writing skill?
Well, I think that for me the thing is to, I just kept writing. And I think I mean, I think one of the things about theatre, you know, playwrights certainly, is that sometimes sometimes that each bit of your life, I think, has a different energy to it. And as long as there's a sort of authenticity to it, you can write a play at 25 that you won't be able to write at 30. So although you do develop skills the more you write, I think equally there's something about capturing the energy of where you are now. And I think so I would love to think that I'd got better, but I don't know. I look back at some of the early things that I wrote when I was in my mid-20s, and they have a sort of energy that you know, and a sort of free playfulness that I maybe wouldn't do now, and it's not worse. There's something about it that's really great. So in answer to your question, but I think in answer to your question, I think the main thing is that one gets better by writing a lot. I get better by writing a lot and trying to get the good bits out. And that's the process with other people. So actually notes are painful from other people, and it's a horrible thing to go in and you spent all this time and then somebody gives you a list of things that are wrong with it. It's every time you want to throw your hands up and quit. I certainly do immediately. But of course, actually, that is how you as long as they're from somebody you respect, that's how you get better. And I've sort of learned to take that in my stride and find people I trust and listen to them, and that develops a script, and then hopefully you do progress as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. I similarly, you know, you do feel disappointed, don't you? You do those times when you want to give up, but then after an hour or 2 hours, you start to think, actually, you can see where it's going. You work on it harder, and slowly you see the draft start to improve, but it is difficult. Nadia, what about, have you noticed anything with your writing when you've got notes? How did you cope? When I was doing that short film and I wrote that script, and then we put it into draft, we had a series of drafts actually, and it was interesting. We got people to feed back. It was really important to get people's views on the work. You know, speaking from, you know, a community aspect, you know, getting them to comment on the work we were producing, you know, and then we can then develop on the boundaries of what's right and wrong and where we stand, and, you know, get that banter. What that discussion is vital, I think. Like Mike was talking about trust. It's really difficult sometimes, you know, who do I trust? At the moment in the theatre world, I'm very in the theatre world, much more than I am film. And in that world, you know, it's a hearing world. Theatre is a hearing world. It's owned by the hearing community. And, you know, if I'm writing a BSL play and I'm giving it to the hearing theatre world, how can they feed back on that? How can they make comments? You know, in 2021, as we are now, everyone's fascinated on community-led projects, you know, and learning more about different communities, Asian communities, Black communities, deaf communities. It's very popular with audiences right now. So we are kind of heading into that right time. The time is now for us to get more representation, but the feedback channel is what we need to develop, I think, with the other communities involved in theatre. Yeah, that's right. Because in the hearing world, in film, in theatre, it is very, very hearing. And so writing a story is difficult, because when you're talking about your deaf experience, for somebody reading it, there'll be no resonance. Nobody understands it. And I'm sure that's similar in other communities. So it's difficult to get meaning across, isn't it? In trying to get the right person to trust to understand and read your work. You feel, what are your views? I mean, Sahera, have you had any experience before in terms of feedback on your work, and how has that made you feel? Was it beneficial? How was it for you?
Oh, yeah, maybe going through the course, there were some teachers that gave feedback. Some of it was positive, some of it was negative. It was always, you need to improve your English, but you know, I just took that as, yeah, I realized that. And for feedback when writing the short film, that was good, but the feedback was okay. I didn't find it upsetting. You have to accept the feedback, the positive as well as the negative, because that's what helps you improve for next time. And also, when I'm writing a book, you send it to an agent and they say it's rejected or accepted, and then give you feedback on that. So that can be upsetting sometimes, but you have to just carry on regardless of it being positive or negative, and view that as that's how you improve in the future. So I think really that's it from my experiences. It's probably the same as acting. You get something, you act really well for one thing and you think, yes, I've got it, and other things don't work.
Yeah, I think some of the notes that I've been given back, you know, maybe 80%, you know, agree. I would agree with you, Sahera. But sometimes, you know, discussions can help improve understanding. I don't disagree. I might just say, you know, that's not right. I think, you know, I think conversation is vital in developing your work. It's good to have that in your process.
Yeah. Also, I'm a deaf female Muslim. and maybe they don't understand my way, potentially.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I want to ask, oh, sorry, Nadia, did you want to comment? Yeah, I just on what Sahera is saying, talking about intersectionality. There's various identities within one human, isn't there? And trying to represent all of those, our stories, it's vast, how do I represent me as Nadia, and how does then somebody accepting my writing understand that? So how do they find the right TV channel to represent it? Maybe there's an Asian channel that would love my writing, but the BBC might say no. There's those kind of debates, I guess, when you're trying to get your writing out there. So who do I approach? Who do I approach with my diverse intersectionality? Yeah, you're right, Nadia. Do you feel awareness is key? Do you think there needs to be more awareness in channels, in theatre? Do you think that area does need to improve? Do you think? How do you feel? Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I am more focused on my intersectionality. I mean, I have strong identities: deaf, I'm a BSL user, I'm Asian, and I'm an Asian with dark skin, which is significant. I'm an Asian with darker skin. So, and the last one is that I'm a woman. So to have all of those have significant impacts. And when do I see that out there? Rarely. When I'm presenting my work, I don't see that out there. So, I always talk about that because that's part of me in my writing, and I sometimes feel conflicted. I remember back in 2016, at that time, I don't think I was ready. I wasn't confident enough to present my work. Now in 21, I feel the time might be right. It's imminent to get it out there. So when you've been watching different programs, theatre shows, do you feel like you see enough intersectionality? Do you think I think we're starting to. I think recently the writer Amanda Wilness, she wrote in Soho, for the Soho Theatre recently. I forgot the name of the play, but it was fantastic. She is of mixed heritage, but she was quite ashamed of part of her heritage, and she kept it very, very secret. And she was, she presented herself as a very English white lady. And when she lost her job, when she lost her flat, she phoned somebody. She spoke to a woman, and she realised actually the woman I was speaking to is black, and so she suddenly realized that actually it was beneficial to have both identities, so she put that in her work. So I do think now is the time to represent ourselves. Yes, I remember growing up and I saw the film Four Weddings and a Funeral. I don't know if you all know that film, very famous film. And obviously there was a deaf actor in the film. He was one of the brothers of the lead actors. And it was probably the first time I saw any kind of TV film with a deaf representation in it. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, I want to see more of that. I loved seeing that. I loved being represented on TV. Sahera, do you feel that there's enough awareness of intersectionality in mainstream work, and how do you feel?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think I've researched it enough, but looking at Twitter and social media, it does seem to be growing. So the South Asian community, the Black groups, the East Asian communities, the other groups, they are writing more and they share their experiences more. So the TV and drama, you see the characters more, you see more intersectionality within the characters. But I don't see deafness as part of that intersectionality. I think it's very underrepresented. So I would like to see more deaf characters and more intersectionality covering deafness within those.
So Mike, I was very interested in your play, Contractions. You wrote that, and it was very popular at the time, and then definitely theatre took it on and asked for your permission to create the show for a deaf audience with deaf actors. What was the experience like for you? I've heard it was very interesting, because I doubt whether you ever thought it would be produced by a deaf theatre. So how did it change your perspective on your work, on the actors? How did you experience that?
Well, there was a personal connection to me, which I think, I'm trying to remember when the production was, but 7 years, it was close to, anyway. 7 years ago, I got hearing loss, severe hearing loss in my left ear, and started to wear a hearing aid, and I sort of and that was sort of a big shock for me. I think it was quite sudden, and I hadn't really come to terms with it, I don't think. And then Paula emailed about doing this production of Contractions, and so in a way there were two things going on for me at that time. There was a sort of objective watching the production, which was really interesting in terms of, I mean, one of the things I got from it was about access, and I think what the production was talking about, and about utilizing access for power, and the play is all about capitalist power to dehumanize people or to make people the same. And I think the production was very interesting, having some bits in sign language, some bits spoken, and so different. You got, for me, who doesn't understand sign language, there were bits of the production that I had to infer that I didn't know what was being said, and that shut me out. I didn't have access. And so it talked about, I think, for both a hearing and a deaf audience, it spoke about how that's used and abused, and so it felt like a really interesting, it's what you want as a writer. Certainly what I want with a revival is not to do the same thing, but for someone to come at it differently and create a new sort of performance text, that it's what you've written, but it's also something very different and new. And I think it's interesting talking about intersectionality, and as a middle-class white straight man, it's an interesting thing to have a company that is coming from the deaf community taking on one of my texts, and not just performing it and being respectful, but doing something with it, making it their own. And I think that's a really interesting experience for me. And just to comment on what you guys are talking about, there's an interesting thing in my head, and I've heard from various people, just to throw in there, and the writer Ella Hickson writes about this, and I've noticed is that there are far more female playwrights writing plays for small spaces, for studio spaces. When they want to write plays for bigger spaces, suddenly all the men appear, and the less women write for those spaces. And what Ella talks about, and I think it's really interesting.
So true.
Yeah, just in terms of gatekeepers and dramaturgy, is that I do wonder if there is, in the very notion of what makes a good play, is defined by a lot of these things, by how able you are, what your cultural background is, your gender, and our notions of what's good and what's bad are not immune from all of those aspects. And so I think that's one of the things that the organizations need to, the mainstream organizations really need to take on. It's not just about finding stories from different communities, it's about the form as well. It's the way, I think it's the forms that I'm really interested in. Is maybe it's not all about the sort of dramatic action, what somebody wants, and it's all about that. Maybe it's more about poetry, depending on the culture that I think there's all sorts of possibilities. And when we talk about diversity, I'm really interested in the diversity of dramaturgy as well, and form. And anyway, linking back to Contractions, anything that can take my work and throw it up in the air and remix it is great for me artistically, and a really fascinating experience with the audience.
So after Contractions, have you written anything any more about deaf characters or anything? Have you thought about the future of doing anything more with the deaf community? Has it influenced your writing?
Well, absolutely. I think it's clearly influenced me. I remember when we were talking, Paula said to me when we were doing Contractions, and I told her about my hearing loss. And whenever I've told anybody else, they went, oh, that's awful, and you know, that's really bad. And Paula went, so what have you learned? What have you gained? And it threw, again, it was like it threw it all on its head. It was like, oh, this is, you know, it's disability. This is actually a doorway into a different world, maybe. And so I feel as a personal journey for me about all of that, and I'm very much in the early stages of that. I really don't know about that yet, but I'm enjoying finding out about it. And then when I adapted, I wrote a play called Bull, which is all about workplace bullying, and it's nasty and brutal. And in the play, it's very much about the idea of survival of the fittest, you know, and a sort of almost Nazi fascist way in which they it's the form of it is a bullfight, and the way they bully this central character is brutal and fascist and horrible. And I adapted that for television, and there was a line in it in the original play about disability. And when we came to television, I wanted to explore that in a more real way. So then the central character in the TV version, which was called Sticks and Stones, had a daughter who was deaf. And so this guy who's trying to be the best at business and trying to wear exactly the right suit, and it's all about being, you know, the same and the best and whatever, on one side had a disabled daughter who was deaf, who he loved completely, but he was really having to deal with this idea of, do I believe in conformity and a sort of, you know, business survival of the fittest, or do I actually embrace true diversity and difference and all the different things that human beings can be? And I think, and that was a really interesting experience. And I think generally now, I think as a writer, I want to try and, you know, broadly speaking, I don't think it's good enough to just go, I'm going to write something, and then when we cast it, we'll try and cast in a diverse way. I think one has to write in a diverse way and try and write authentically into the experiences of those characters. So that's what I'd love to do more, and I generally try and do in everything I write now, particularly on television, is to make sure that it you know, properly reflects the world, and it reflects the opportunities and the interesting stories to be told. And certainly feeling like now I have a little bit of experience of that means it's an experience, a subject or an experience that I'd love to write about more. Yeah.
I just wanted to come in if I can. Wow, how do I say this? I'm a little bit anxious now. I'm hesitant, I guess. If I'm writing for a hearing character, for me, how I think about hearing people, what hearing people think, how they speak, the English they use. I mean, I got no idea as a writer because I've never been in that place. I've never heard anything. I was born completely deaf. So thinking about creating diversity in our writing is something where I get stuck on, actually. So that's where I think conversation, speaking to people who have those experiences, gaining that knowledge is vital. But obviously that takes time. It's time consuming. So maybe you need a hearing consultant rather than a BSL consultant, someone to come in and advise you, Nadia. That would be useful, wouldn't it? Switching those roles, that would be good. It's interesting, isn't it? Mike, I just did want to ask you one more question. If you were about to approach a new series or a new program when you're writing, and so you're commissioned, let's say, so you've been commissioned and you're talking to the producer or the exec and you're chatting about inclusion, I don't know, maybe including a disabled actor or or an ethnic character, when do you think you should start those conversations?
For me, it starts with the writing. It starts long before I would talk to an exec, and it would be specific in the writing. So one thing that I've done since quite early is write the surname of the character, so that I'm specific about ethnicity and background. What I learned was that there was I don't think it would happen now, but even 5-6 years ago, if you didn't do that, they would end up white. You'd end up with loads of white people. And, you know, and the argument would go, well, they're more famous, you know, basically, they're more, or they wouldn't say that, but they'd say they're more, you know, their profile is high, you know, higher, or whatever they want to say. And I learned quickly that if you actually want to have a diverse cast, if you know, then write the surname. And then of course, actually, as you write it, when you do that, and then you give them a surname, you then give them a background, and then you go further and you go further, and then you realize that you have to write the specifics of these characters. So for me, I think the process would go that it's not just, you know, that diversity isn't just a sort of window dressing so that we can all feel comfortable and you know, we're okay, which I think is sometimes how it's talked about, but it's actually there for a reason, and it's the world you're writing about, and it informs part of the story. And if it's, you know, and then I think it's about early on doing the research and making sure you've got all the information you need, and taking the time to do that. And that, for me, it's a combination of somebody before you produce, you're in production. So it's not the actor, actually, because the actor can feel different pressures. The actor might feel they have to agree with you, or when you've written that thing that's not accurate, they might not feel they can say that. So it's about finding someone before you get to that stage who can tell you how wrong you are and help you with it. And then also let the actor be an advocate for the character on when they're playing as well, and be open to you know, adjusting and changing and doing all of that. I think there's an absolutely fascinating what's the word, dialectic or contradiction or something about theatre particularly, which is that the thing I love is writing people that aren't me. I'm not that interested in writing about people that are men who are 40 and live where I live and whatever. I couldn't think of anything more boring. And yet authenticity and truth is what we're all after. And you know, so I think that's all, but I think there's hay to be made in that contradiction. I think that's where some of the really good stuff is, about mixing the interior, what you are, with the very thing you're not. So some of my favorite writing about men is written by women, you know, and some of the best writing about Englishness has been written by the Irish. It's like there's a sort of there's potential there, but it's very complicated, and I think one has to just do the work, isn't it? It's just do the work, really, for me anyway.
Thank you. So when talking about writing, it's interesting, isn't it? When we're talking about different cultures writing, so somebody from Ireland or a woman, you know, writing on other people's perspectives is interesting. Nadia, you mentioned that you find that really difficult because you've never heard. So Sahera, what characters have you written about, and what made you create those characters? How did you find them? Where did you get your inspiration from? Where did it come from?
I create many characters, deaf and hearing. And I try to research a character's background. But now I've learned that you don't have to do a really specific background. So one example, I wrote a short play, No Words, and we had a deaf BSL actor. We didn't need to say what their background was, what their history was, where they were from. We didn't need to say about that. The character's name was Nice, and they were talking about their experience of prison. So it wasn't any stereotypical story, it was just their experience. So it was coming from the perspective of everybody's human. So the character could have been white. I could have cast it differently, I looked for a deaf woman character over 18, and that was it. So that was quite easy. So I didn't need to go into specifics of backgrounds. So I thought that was quite helpful. So yeah, you can do it that way.
Interesting. So opportunities, let's talk about them for deaf writers. I mean, I remember way back, maybe 15 years ago, I think it must have been, yeah, it was maybe even 16, because I'm nearly 40 now, becoming a middle-aged man. It's interesting, I think back then, I was working with VTV, a deaf program, and I then went to Definitely Theatre and did some writing for them, and got loads of training. And then after that, I did a 5-minute short play, Ladies in the Dark, and then it was about two women in the toilet arguing with each other. And then I learned from those pieces, those shorts that I did, and then I gradually expanded it to half an hour. And it kind of felt like, you know, you just took one step at a time, and your learning was quite slow, but at the same time, what I know now is the opportunities. I mean, training is vital, I think, really, really vital. Tuition. I mean, did you have those opportunities like I've had? Did you have any courses? I think really I've just been really lucky in my career. I have to thank Definitely Theatre. They partnered with the Royal Court, and that gave me an opportunity to do a course. So I was also working as an actor and meeting writers and having the opportunity to learn and be guided by them, and be invited sometimes to their production rooms and see how writers and the production work together. And so from there, I learned quite a lot, but I was encouraged to ask questions, which was important too. And I think when I went to the course, well, actually, before that, at City Lit, which is a college in London, they gave me a short writer's course, and that the aim of that was just to write a book, not a film. It was just a book. And then I think BSL Zone did a project called Zoom back in 2010. And so then I presented some work from them. They gave me an opportunity to develop it into a script. I got training, you know, I was still working. So I had lots of opportunities that I got along the way. And now, where I am now, so Definitely Theatre with the Royal Court, that gave me a course that really built my confidence even more. I'll never forget, because I am BSL first. I was very direct at the Royal Court, and being so direct, I think, when we're looking at choreography, for example, they showed me how from a book, they could develop their choreography from words on a page, and that really influenced me. So I would write it in BSL structure, not in English. So something it would look like this. So when we're doing the choreography, and it kind of was the same way for me to develop my writing. They would give me that choreography, which would help me to develop my language in BSL, and then it would then be worked into English. But also meaning, etc., was then added into the work. So I could copy other, I mean, it's really, really hard, but that way of working I loved. It was challenging, it was risky, but I really feel now tech is so much better. You can send out QR codes, and you can get a book and send it out there just like that. Stephen Webb recently did some writing, and he owns the Live company, and he then created a book in English, put a QR code in it, and then got it translated into BSL, which made it accessible for everybody. So there is so much going on right now that can make writing more accessible for everyone. So the opportunities and projects, what's coming up for you now? Well, what I'm really excited about is my one-woman show. So Mike was talking about access to stories, and then playing around with the characters. And so I'm doing a one-woman show, and I don't think we've ever seen that one-woman show, deaf BSL user, without voiceover. So just one woman all the way through. I don't think I've ever seen a one woman show. So I'm really excited about writing for that. And it doesn't matter who that deaf person is. It could be, and it doesn't matter what ethnicity they are. It's just going to be one deaf BSL user, that show, going to watch a play and just learning from that, learning about our world. That's going to be amazing. Wow. Sahera, what's next for you? What's going on for you?
Well, I would like to carry on with my no word production and see where that leads me. Because it explores the court system, the prison system, and real experiences. So I know a bit about police, but I need to find somebody who's more experienced than I am with the police system. So I'm looking for somebody to work with. I'd like to interview more people as well. I'm writing a new short film. It's a comedy. I haven't yet written it, but I've done one short video submission, but that's another short film that I'm going to be writing. I'm writing 2 books as well at the moment, one for Muslim signs and one deaf story book. So they're still very much in development. So I've got 4 things going at the moment and things are progressing slowly.
You're always really busy. You always write so much. How do you do it with all the other stuff you've got going on? Family, how do you juggle it all? I mean, you just sit there just typing away whilst you're doing everything else. Tell us how you do it.
Oh, I just started doing freelance writing and acting maybe 2 years ago. I just sat there with a laptop. I was looking after the children, and I found time to just sit for a couple of hours. Most people maybe stay at home and don't do much or go out. You know, I was being encouraged to go out and meet people, but I can manage well.
And what do you do to relax? I mean, are you just always working, or are you just one of those people that just loves to be busy? What's your secret?
I like keeping busy. I enjoy working. I enjoy working, but I do relax. I watch films, so I do watch films every so often. And when I'm watching them, I'm thinking about other things and work, and thinking about how I can develop things.
That's research, watching films. That's still work, really,
Well,
isn't it? I mean,
yeah, but I do like watching films. It's a pleasure for me.
Yeah, I think it's great, isn't it, to embrace other people's work and allow that to influence you. And I think if you don't do that, you're looking in your work, aren't you? I think it's important, really important. That's just my view, just to be eclectic about the work you're consuming.
I just carry on working, carry on creating. Thoughts come into my mind and I develop them further. I just carry on. That's who I am.
Do you feel that's important, Mike? Do you feel that it's important to be diverse in the work that you're consuming as well as the work you're developing? Does that influence you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you get out what you put in to some extent, and I think also that, you know, particularly over the last year and a half, we've all been trapped in our own worlds to some extent, and I think it's the only way that we've been able to go new places, meet new things, understand new concepts. I'm going through an Audible thing at the moment of listening to a lot of books, and it's brilliant. And you know, I went through a period of doing a lot of TV back to back, and it was great. I was very, very lucky to do that. But I found that it meant that while my craft was, I was getting a lot of practice for craft and writing, the art, and exactly what you're talking about, the sort of diversity of ideas and diversity of worlds and all that sort of stuff wasn't happening, because I didn't have time to watch things. I didn't have time to live, to go and meet people and do different projects and talk to people. So I've taken a break the last, you know, actually coinciding almost exactly with the pandemic, to exactly what you're talking about, to put things in and you know, both reach out to other worlds and other people and things that aren't me, but also to investigate me and what my weirdities, because the strangeness that often the ways in which we think we're strange is where the good writing is going to come from, and it's we spend all our lives, spend a lot of our lives trying to seem competent or good at what we do, or presentable or charming, and actually it was good to take some time to have a look in my head and see what was really going on. Yeah.
So deaf representation, I think, is a big issue for many of us in the community of writers. And I think when we're looking at TV and theatre, Nadia, do you have any positive examples of representation or any negative examples that you've seen? Maybe film, maybe it be TV, theatre. Well, so EastEnders, for example, there's a new character called, it's Rosie. Finally, it's nice to see, a consistent, a regular, if you like, in a show like that. It makes it motivating, doesn't it? That we can do this work, and it's a start. And I think Rosie, is her sign name Rosie or Rosie? She was in I'm in the social media. I'm really, really strong in the community of social media within the deaf community. And there was a bit of an uproar when Rosie was in the car crash. They were like, why wasn't she the driver? The director, not the producer. They were targeting why didn't they think of it? Why didn't they do it that way? And it's interesting, isn't it? Looking at when we're talking about there's not enough actors, and then we've got hearing people pretending to be deaf, that kind of scenario. But specifically in terms of that car crash, they did target the writer and the community and say, well, why didn't they think about the perspective of the deaf character in that scenario? I think it was the rules of production that influenced that scenario, and that conversation doesn't happen with the audience. But I think there's positives and negatives, isn't it? And how does the community fit into that one character, and how do the whole community be represented by that one character? There's just negatives. I think there's just not enough of us being represented on TV and theatre. We need much more representation. So when I worked in EastEnders, I created the character Frankie. I was really proud of that, to create a deaf character. And when I did, put forward my story, Ben was the deaf character in the show. And, it was a really good opportunity. But Frankie, really, I wanted her to be primarily a BSL user. I'm not involved in the show now, and this was 1 year ago when I was involved. But it's interesting, the BSL isn't a significant part, and I think that was what I was disappointed in, that my influence didn't hit harder. And with that car crash, like I've said before, it made a deaf person look like a bad driver. And it was because of their hearing loss. I think it was people can drive. They do really well at driving, and I think it says a lot, about society and how we are viewed within society, and the consequence of stereotyping. And like you, I was really disappointed that the signing caused the car crash. But Frankie, overall, is influencing people in her role, and I think that's important. People have been texting me that Velma Jackson will be in Coronation Street, so I thought that's fantastic. Another deaf actor in a popular show, and I think it is starting to make the difference. It is influencing people. I think, Sahera, what about you? Do you see good, positive representation? What influences you too in terms of that representation? What's good, what's bad?
Oh, so I'm watching some deaf characters in films, short films, on television, and in some adverts. And I think it's a good start, but it's just the start. I've learned how deaf people can be represented, and it's the director who's written it. And of course, a lot of those are hearing people. So I think there are very few deaf and disabled writers, and even fewer characters. So I think there should be more things written for deaf characters to get the representation out there. With my area, I think the Muslim representation for me within films is the Muslims are always represented negatively: terrorists, forced marriage, honor killings. So there's a lot of negativity out there about Muslims, but there's very little positive reinforcements of Muslim people. So it's about trying to get that message out there. But so deaf people are represented more, but I would like more Muslim representation as well.
I really agree with Sahera's points. I really want to advocate her feelings. You know, there's always this negative representation of colour, and I can't, you know, whether it's theatre, whether it's mainstream TV programming, there's lots of assumptions, lots of stereotyping. And why can't we draw on the positivity that these communities give to society and concentrate on them and the influences they have, whether we be Hindu, whether we be Asian? You know, I think we need to draw more on the positives than the negatives, but sadly mainstream do focus on the negatives more. And I think we need to advocate those positive stories more in our writing. You know, it's the same when you're watching police dramas, black people being arrested and thrown into the cells. I love the program Misfits. I don't know if anybody ever seen Misfits. Michelle, one of the writers, her perspective is just empowering. Of course, there are plenty of deaf actors in films and series, but often they speak English, and I often think that's because of the ease of the director, the ease of producing the show. And actually, where's the depth? Where's the depth of our culture within the TV, within the program, with the theatre? I think, you know, it needs to start, like Mike said, in the writing. We need to be talking specifically about saying this is a character who uses BSS to ensure that representation is out there. We do need more. We do need more. We've been very lucky to have plenty of questions come in, and I'd want to say to the audience watching, please post your questions in the Q&A box, however you feel. I think Facebook is probably the same situation. Add it to the comments. Don't worry about your English structure, your writing. Please don't worry about that. We will deal with it as it comes. I think questions are already coming in, so let me just check. So the first question we have, so it's from Teresa Warren, and she asks, do you have any tips to start writing? And if you have a deadline instead, what do you rely on adrenaline, or how do you meet that deadline? How do you get there? Are you just relying on adrenaline and tapping away? So Mike, I'm going to ask you first. When you're writing, are you one of those writers that prepare, or are you working towards a deadline and then it just comes with a heap load of adrenaline?
I used to be the adrenaline person, and I would lock myself in a room for days, and then, you know, the 3 days before the deadline, and I'd love that sort of, I think I was charged by that sort of romance of it, the sort of garret writer, you know, like slaving away. And then I had kids, and it turns out you can't go away from your kids for 3 days because you've got to write a play. That's not allowed for some reason. So now I've trained myself, and I have to say this is better for health, mental health, everything, to try and do it more in chunks, and to say, I don't have to do everything. I just have to do a thing today. So if I have a thought that's like a breakthrough on a character, that's a good day's work, you know. And if I manage to, and some days it'll just be a thought, and some days it'll be 10 pages, and some days it'll be nothing. But actually trying to sort of do at least something each day, it means that the advantage of that is you if you can do it, which is, this is all new. This is like happened to me in the last few years, a couple of years. But if you can do it, is that suddenly you end up with a piece of work that you're not quite sure how it happened, because you've just been steadily working at it. And I'm enjoying that. In terms of tips for starting writing, one of the things that I find useful is just to start writing, literally just free writing with a pen, and don't let your pen stop. And if you get stuck, just write the same word over and over again, and do that for sort of 3 pages. And you can either do that just with prose, or I can often do it with dialogue. Just 2 people, you don't know who they are, they just start talking to each other. And it's amazing. That's how Harold Pinter wrote his plays. And if you imagine just free writing dialogue without worrying about how good it was, and you did that for half an hour every day, imagine how many ideas you'd have, how much writing you'd do. You know, you'd be full of ideas. And I think often it's just getting started to let your brain be free and not be thinking, is this good or bad, but just seeing what happens and playing with it. It's called a play for a reason.
For me, I think some last minute stuff, but now I do it in advance, because I like to write and maybe have, you know, a draft, and then 2 days before the deadline I can review it, go through it again, and have time to think about what I've written, maybe implement some new ideas in the piece. And then, you know, I think preparation is key. I'm a stressful person anyway. I don't work well with stress, and every writer is different. So Sahera, what about you? Do you like to work in advance or right up to the deadline?
I think for me it depends. So if there's an opportunity to do it in advance, or sometimes it has to be done last minute. I use interpreters to polish up my English. Sometimes that can't be done in advance, so I have to do that last minute and just think, oh well, I'll have to do that in advance next time.
Nadia? I mean, I have loads of ideas just stuck all around my house on post-it notes. That's how I start. I just think of something, write it down, stick it in my house on somewhere. And then, you know, sometimes I get a bit frozen, so I get writer's block. So I'll just go and start looking at all my post-it notes around the house and gather my thoughts again. And then actually last minute, I do like working last minute, because I can play everything, and then I can like look at it and put it on a desk, and then think how I can plot it all together and move it into a piece. And then I read it through, and then I send it off. Have a look at the next question the audience has posed. So it's a good question. So Rachel Williams has asked, I love writing, but sometimes I do get writer's block. So a writer's block is where you just freeze. You can't, that's a really good sign actually. Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, you just freeze, you're frozen, you're working, and then suddenly bang, you can't think anything else. So Nadia, what do you think? What do you do as a deaf writer? I think for me, pressure is good at the point of writer's block, because the writing can wait. So if you are facing it, go and do something, your favorite hobby, I don't know, go move away from the work. Maybe, like, let's say your deadline is 5 o'clock, and then 24 hours you've got, and you're blocked. I just pick my hobby. Like I'll go and swim. I don't know. I live near the sea, so I can just jump into the seas. And then I suddenly find that loads of stuff comes to my mind, and then I'm back and I just tap away as fast as I can. It's like a mind dump on the page. Mike, what's your style?
Well, I think there's two things. I think one is absolutely like Nadia was saying, and there's a Paul Abbott version of that. Paul Abbott, who wrote Shameless, says that when he gets blocked, he rejects the whole thing. He almost throws his computer across the room and says, "I've had it with you. We're not doing this anymore. I reject the entire project." Then storms out, and of course, as soon as he gets out of the room, he thinks what the next step should be and comes back to it. But he needs that sort of anger with the project to let it out, and I think that there's something quite I recognize that. But I think there's also another thing. Sometimes particularly with a play, when I've got blocked, it's a good sign. It means that you haven't got something right in the structure underneath. Like for me, the block is often that the characters just stop talking to each other. They've got nothing to say. Nothing needs to happen, and that probably means that I haven't got the story right, so I have to go back, so actually these things can be not your failing. Suddenly you're a terrible writer because you can't think of what the next word is, but sometimes it's because organically your stories run out of steam and you need to go back and slightly retool it. But it's not a sign that you're suddenly that minute a bad writer, and everyone has it, everyone has it. It's completely normal.
So going back to our audience questions, who's next? What does that say? Oh yeah. So we've got a question for you, Sahera. So this one is from Rachel, and she asks, you did a 10-week course that you mentioned. Where did you do it? And was it deaf-led, or was it a mainstream course that you attended?
Yep, so the 10-week creative course was with the City Lit. So yeah, City Lit in London. So it was run by hearing. Yep, so it's run by hearing people. They provided an interpreter. Everybody was hearing and I was the only deaf person, but it was a 10-week creative writing course. Oh, it was so long ago, I can't remember how much it was, and the price has probably increased since then. But there are other ways that you can do. There are creative writing courses from, there's an online course that you can study, and they have no deadline. So you take the course at your own speed. So you go through, have the tutorials on a one-to-one, and submit the work online.
Like I said, I was lucky enough to go to the Definitely Theatre course, which I would recommend highly. But Nadia, you went to the Royal Court. There's lots of places available for us to go and learn our trade. It's important that we are as much representation in mainstream as we are in specifically deaf courses. Yeah, deaf-led, of course, there's brilliant opportunities, and that's where I started. So I think it's important to go from there, but then branch out. There's another organisation called DANK that's currently up and running.
Yep.
And that's the disabled community. They have a form of writers, and they have lots of opportunities. So I would recommend looking at their website and seeing what's out there. So it's called DANK, the production. We've got a question from Zoe McWhinney. And I think all of us know Zoe. Hi, Zoe. What was her question? It's a good question. So she's asking, so deaf actors, they're given an English script and they then have to translate that script into BSL for the production or the show. Should they be paid extra as specialist actors providing a service? And she also asks, so should those deaf actors who produce those translations, should they have copyright of their material? I remember, yeah, a Shakespeare show, Midsummer Night's Dream, and we were all working together, producing the translation. And I agree, it's his copyright, but the writing, when we filmed it, it was, I mean, when we filmed, I mean, it's out there now, the filming of it, but one issue, when you film as an actor doing a translation, it's always my translation, you know, we're doing the job of a director in some way, like the director who's directing a Shakespeare. I mean, you know, we never know with Shakespeare characters who they are. They tend to be just human, and then they're drafted in by the director. And I think it's my character. So then it's me, it's my translation. So to copyright that, can somebody else copy it? I mean, I think it's up to the actor. I think it's for us, our role is to deliver meaning, isn't it, in those translations. So it could be, let's say we were doing this and the text is originally French, if you don't already know, and so it wasn't English. So when we were translating it, she had a French interpreter and we had a BSL interpreter, and then it became an English. So I think there was 3 or 4 languages involved in this room just to get this piece into English, and the concern was losing culture, because obviously the accuracy of a language is fine, but then do you lose the culture by maintaining the accuracy? And I think for me, like I've said, I always produce my work in BSL first. We get grants for translation? No, we don't. But then it's really up to you how you deliver your work to a hearing audience. I mean, you could have 3 or 4 different translations going on. It's really up to you. It's your work, but yeah, we should have that freedom, I think. We have a question now from Ben Spiller. And it's actually a really good question. Interesting. Which of your previous writing are you most proud of? Which piece of work? And have you ever had any responses from your audience that have surprised you when viewing or consuming your work? Has it defied expectation? So what are you proud of? Mike, I'll ask you first. What are you most proud of?
Well, that's a hard question, isn't it? That's that they always say it's like choosing which of your children you love the most. I don't know, and it probably changes all the time, doesn't it? But I mean, at the moment, I'm really proud. My play Earthquakes in London was about climate change, and particularly was about generational approaches to climate change, and ended up with a young woman walking the earth to raise awareness for a sort of climate thing, and I feel like I'm really proud of how the form of that tackled that subject, that it was a sort of, the form of it was like a cabaret at the end of the world, a sort of pre-apocalyptic show. And it, you know, it was trying to find a way of talking about that subject in a way that would bring it mainstream and fun and engage a sort of urgent approach, but also put it in the mainstream and give it to lots of audiences. And I think I sort of feel you have those ambitions for pieces of work that are both within the work and how they're received in the audience. And I feel like with that one, we managed to do it in both the text and the production. So yeah, I mean, I think normally for me the pride comes out of finding some connection with an audience, and it may just be one person that comes up to me and says something, and if I have that, then that I'm really happy with that. That's all you're after for me anyway.
So I wanted to ask you, which is your kids is your favorite, by the way?
Oh, I was going to say I could tell you that straight away, but you know, maybe not on Facebook Live.
So moving on, Nadia, what about you? What are you most proud of? So my first short film called All Day, yeah, I loved that. I loved that, Charlie saying. Yeah, I mean, it was really simple writing. It was hard how to share comedy and culture. I mean, so I'm pretty proud that I achieved that. So it belongs now to the BFI. What, All Day is it called? Oh yeah, they own it now. So yeah, I'm most proud of that. Was it? It's the BSL's own production. It was, yeah, but no, yeah, BFI. I ran a panel. It was shown at the film festival, and
Wow,
so
well
they commissioned
done.
ownership. So I'm very proud of that. So All Day was a fantastic story. It was about love and laughter, and I felt like, you know, it was a very British film, wasn't it? It was, you know, so are you going to make, is there going to be a second series? I mean, a second film? I mean, I'm currently, I'd like to bring a part 2 back. I would like the story hasn't ended. I'm sure the story is still continuing. It's still out there. I think I wrote it in 2010, so it's been 11 years. The characters are still alive. I'm sure they're still out there. So I don't think it's not one of those stories that would end. So yeah, I would love to bring a part 2 back. I'm confident for that, actually, part 2. So hopefully one day, Charlie's saying. Sahera, what about you? What's your proudest piece of work?
Oh, I've got so much. I think I'm most proud of is my solo performance called I Am. So that's shown regularly for a year. The audience was hearing. There was no voices, it was completely visual. I had really positive feedback about that. So that helped me build my confidence to create a second play, which I did during lockdown. It's an Arabic story. So I got funding from that to create that story. And I think that went well. And I think probably they're the things I'm really proud of. And it's won a few awards as well.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, well done. So our next question is from Paris Thompson. And she asks you, Nadia, sorry, what was the question? How did you, as a BSL user, interact at the Royal Court? And did you find there to be any barriers? And if there were, I mean, communication, I think is the question. How did you engage in that communication? So the play, Midnight Movie, was the first time I worked at the Royal Court. First day, I went in, taught deaf awareness. I didn't like to lecture people, so I could deliver it in what kind of a comical elements. You know, I do some acting, education. It's a full production, really. So it's everybody from the productions, the creatives, the writers, the directors. So they really get to know me, and I think people accept things better through comedy. They don't feel like they're there to learn. It kind of raises awareness, but in a quite discreet way, and people are more engaged then. So I put in a bit of deaf history, and so the Midnight Movie play, I think the rehearsal, I said in the Royal Court, how long was it? I think the rehearsal was about 2.5 months. So every day seeing these people, every single day, the staff, the crew, the writers, and you know, we just got a relationship, and then we explored things through BSL. And there was one performance which was amazing. One performer, his name was Tim Crouch, and he's famous. But he doesn't write first. His method is to draw first. So he literally draws his script first and then produces a performance. And I loved it. So I think Royal Court is becoming open to moving away from the old archaic ideas of writing and performing, and actually thinking about other ways of doing it, including us as the deaf community. I mean, I came in and give brief stories, and then kind of, you can see the writers' faces going, oh yeah, you know, and so then they develop collabs, and then I'm doing one now actually. So, you know, it comes from getting yourself out there and networking and, you know, getting people engaged. That's how I did it, and that's how I start. Charlie's asking, do you have interpreters there every day? Yes, yeah. I have 2 interpreters with me all day through all rehearsals, working with me. And where do you get the funding from for that? So Royal Court, they got funding from the Arts Council in the first instance, and also there is budget produced and provided by Access to Work. I don't want it to be solely on the deaf person to rely on their budgets. I think the people that are bringing us in are, you know, it's their obligation to do that. They need to be behind us, not in front of us. So I think, you know, it's not just my responsibility for you to understand me, it's vice versa. So I think the Royal Court did a really good job with that. Bristol Old Vic as well, they learned that too. The Royal Exchange Theatre, Manchester. I've had some really good experiences, and it's growing. It's growing. The interest in us as deaf writers is definitely growing. So yeah. Sahera, do you have communication support in your work? How do you use it? Does you have access to work funding? How does it work?
Yes, finally I got access to work 4 years ago, and prior to that I didn't, and I was really struggling with my English, so I was having to pay for people to proofread for my English. But finally I got access to work funding, so I have interpreter support now, which has made working a bit easier. I still submit my scripts, we still have meetings to discuss those scripts and production, but access to work definitely is definitely worth getting that funding.
Mike, I want to ask you, you mentioned that you now have hearing loss in your left ear, and has that changed your way you access your work in terms of going to production meetings? Do you use equipment, or how has it changed? How has it impacted your life?
Yeah, I ploughed on for a while thinking it was all just normal and fine, but then I found I've got very loud tinnitus in that ear, and I found that, for instance, in rehearsal rooms full of hard surfaces, if there was any background noise, I couldn't hear anything, and if there was hard surfaces, I just found myself getting by about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, exhausted, and just couldn't do it. I mean, and even now, I'm not sure I've done a full day in rehearsals since it happened, and so I suppose that changes. I don't do meetings in cafes anymore because what happened was, I think, because I tried to ignore it for a long time, it then really did affect my life, but in ways that I hadn't noticed. So I stopped seeing friends because I wouldn't go to bars and stuff because I was worried I wouldn't be able to hear them. I would worry about meeting new people because I felt I couldn't ask them to repeat 3 times, all things like that. And so in a I'd say there were about 2 years where it affected me and I was ignoring it. And then since then, I've that's one of the things, is realizing that one has to take it on as it is. It is me now. That is me, and I have access needs that I need to learn to articulate and tell people about. And all this sounds obvious in a way, but it really didn't come as an obvious thing to me. I mean, I feel a bit embarrassed talking about it in this forum because, I don't know. I'm not, but mainly because I'm not used to talking about it, to be honest. But what I have learned is that I need to talk about it more professionally, and that when I do, so far people have been very understanding generally. But it has to be quite clearly articulated what you need and what you can't do, and what you can do, and all of that. So yeah, it's a learning curve for me.
Rose, you're on mute.
For growing, it's a very similar journey for all of us as deaf people. I think I remember being in a mainstream school and trying to emulate my hearing peers, and then realizing as I got older, actually embracing my identity was the best thing I ever did. It was definitely a journey for me. So I hope, Mike, today that will be the same result for you.
Definitely, definitely.
I think we've got time for one or two questions, but time is running out. We've got a question from Kirsty. And she's an interesting question, actually. So if the three of you could look back over your career, going back to when you were young, when you were a teenager, if you met yourself as a teenager, what would you tell yourself as a teenager? Does that make sense? What advice would you give? I think, what advice would you give to yourself if you met yourself as a teenager, knowing what you know now? Nadia, I'll start with you. Or I remember an interpreter. I think back then I didn't know I had the right to use an interpreter. So, you know, I'd be there trying to make myself understood. And, you know, I was very involved in the deaf community because of the lack of interpreter provision. Or my father was the one actually that said, go and utilize an interpreter. And I didn't even know what the word interpreter meant. I didn't even know, you know, I knew communication support, which was very different from interpreter. Interpreters, you know, have rules and boundaries. But as a teenager, my father pushed me and said, go do your work, but use an interpreter. And I was very anxious about that. But now I'm so comfortable with the process. And what's funny, I think if I, you know about deaf culture, everybody's very open, everything's basically, you know, they talk for a long time, you know, they've got to give out the full story. And now I realize that actually hearing people don't necessarily need to know my entire backstory before they need to know what's going on for me now. And I think, yeah, I think I would advise myself to know my rights, because in doing that, it gives me more freedom. And I think back then it wasn't taught to us as deaf children, you know, it wasn't talked about in a deaf club about what the provisions are for us as, you know, deaf adults going on our journey. I think more understanding of what's available to me and what my rights are, you know, I think it's never too late. I mean, in fact, I didn't know that now, and I'm now nearly 40 and I do know that, and I still got there in the end. But I think we're still learning, aren't we? I think we all have similar experiences. Sahera, so what would you say to yourself what would you say to your teenage self?
Oh, looking back, I think it would be writing about the real world and take things slower. I wanted to rush through things. So now it's doing things properly, not doing them quickly and okay. It's doing them properly and taking my time. And how you can create the story, how you can create that dialogue, and taking it one step at a time. So when I was younger, I just wanted to rush through and get it done. So I think that's a good thing to do now, is to learn from that journey that I've had and relax into it, be more comfortable in it. It is hard work, but you get it done. And also access to work, finally, from a few years ago. And that's been working well.
I agree with you. So Mike, what would your advice be? Oh, we lost you, but you're back.
Wrong button, sorry. I'd learned how to use a computer in my teenage years. No, I think I would say that I think I would say the things that make you different are your superpowers. And when I was a teenager, I thought the things that made me different were really shameful. And I think that I spent a lot of time wanting to be the same as other people. And as I've got older, I've realized it's exactly those things that make you different that are actually going to be the things that mean you thrive and stand out and enjoy your life. And that feels like such a 180-degree turn. I wish I could tell myself that, because I spent a long time worrying about being different in any way at all. So yeah, a bit of comfort, I think, for teenage me.
Brilliant. We've now come to the end of our panel, our show. I want to say firstly, in September the 2nd, we have our next panel event. Next time we are talking about directors. So yeah, I recommend audience, please sign up, watch that discussion. I think it's going to be incredibly interesting about deaf directors. Again, hosted by Definitely Theatre. Have a look on the website and just register. Also, you can subscribe to the email to get all the information. I want to thank Mike. I want to thank Nadia. Thank you to Sahera. And I'm sorry. So September 2nd is about deaf actors and hearing directors. It's a debate, a bit different than I thought. Sorry, got the topic wrong. So yeah, deaf actors and hearing directors, a debate, 3 of each. So we'll have 3 deaf actors and 3 hearing directors. It's a discussion show. It'll be very, very interesting. I hope it will go well and that there won't be any conflict. A good debate. I'm having a good, healthy debate. September. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, Sahera, for giving us your time. It's so interesting to meet you all. Stay safe, and thank you, everybody, for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.